Today, we're going to talk about stuff that doesn't matter. When a lot of people think about what makes a rich country rich, or what leads to economic success, typically they tend to think about resources, whether it's oil or minerals or crops. But as it turns out, those things actually don't matter nearly as much as something else. And today, we're going to talk about that something else. So here's our first example. This is a bridge in southern France. It's called the Pont du Gard. It was built about 2,000 years ago by the Romans. It has an aqueduct across the top of it, and then right across in the middle, there's a bridge that you can walk across or ride a horse across. Now, when the Romans went to build this, what kind of resources did they have available? They had a large number of workers, and they had a lot of stone, and the rest of their tools were really pretty basic. They had levers, they had pulleys, and that was about it. Really basic building techniques and building materials. And this bridge is still standing 2,000 years later. So let's look at another bridge. This bridge was built in 1940 in Washington State. It's called the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And when it was built, the most high-tech materials and the most high-tech techniques were used. They had high-grade steel for the bridge, they used reinforced concrete, they had electric tools, they had steam winches, they had all this modern industrial equipment and techniques to build this very high-tech bridge. But it still fell down less than a year after it was built. So what's the reason that this Roman bridge, built with very basic materials and very basic techniques, still stands after 2,000 years, while the modern industrial bridge fell down? What's the difference? When the Romans built a bridge, they tested it. And they tested it by taking a huge cart, loading it up with as many stones as it would carry, hitching it up to some oxen, and driving that big heavy cart across the bridge. The idea was if the bridge was going to fall down at all, it would fall down first under this big heavy load. But here's the key. The Romans made the guy who designed and oversaw the construction of the bridge drive that ox cart. So that engineer had a tremendous incentive to build that bridge as strongly as possible. Clearly, in 20th century America, those bridge builders did not want the Tacoma Narrows Bridge to fall down. But their incentives were not quite as sharp as the Roman bridge builder. It wasn't their lives on the line. So at the end of the day, it was not the materials, it was not the technology, it was not the resources. It was a difference in incentives. Here's a second example. The Jamestown colony, the first English-speaking colony here in North America. It was founded in 1605 in Virginia. And those colonists spent about the first 10 years of the colony starving. They never had enough food, and many of the colonists actually did starve. But then, after those first 10 years, after about 1615, the colony thrived. The colonists had plenty of food, and their numbers increased, and it took off. So what changed in 1615? Was it that the colonists had better relationships with the Native Americans, and the Native Americans helped them out? No. Actually, over the course of this period of time, the relationship between the colonists and the Native Americans got worse, not better. Was it that they found better farmland and were able to grow more food? No, they were farming exactly the same farmland. Was it that they learned better techniques of farming? No, it was the same people using exactly the same techniques. So what changed in 1615? Before 1615, they all went out to the field, they all worked, and then they took the output from that field and divided it up equally. So if you spent the whole summer working really hard to really get out there and grow some extra food, how much of that extra output would you be able to get for yourself? Well, if there's 100 colonists, you get 1%. So the colonists realized that if they worked extra hard to produce that food, they wouldn't get the benefit from that. And on the flip side, if they slacked off and didn't really work very hard, they would still get their 1 out of 100 share of whatever was produced. So the colonists didn't work hard. They wandered off, they went looking for gold, they didn't work in the fields, and as a result, they didn't grow enough food. In 1615, they made a very simple change to the rules. They divided up the farmland so that each person had their own individual plot of land. You could do whatever you wanted with the food that you grew. They grew their own food, they ate it, they sold it to each other, they gave it to their families, and the colonies thrived. It was a change in incentives that ended the starvation and brought about abundant food supplies. So here's our third example. This is the Korean Peninsula. It's over in Asia, kind of between Japan and China. The Korean Peninsula is split between two countries, North Korea and South Korea. There's many different ways that you could compare any two countries. You could look at statistics, GDP, life expectancy, but it turns out that actually electrical consumption is really well correlated with all of the standard of living and industrialization measures that we would be looking at. So here's another image of the two Koreas. This is an image taken by satellite from space. You can see very clearly South Korea all lit up, whereas North Korea is a black hole. So we have really stark differences between a prosperous, wealthy South Korea and an incredibly poor, underdeveloped North Korea. What explains those differences? Is it because of the differences in natural resources? No, North and South Korea are on the same peninsula. They have the same geography. They have the same natural resources. Is the difference because of different climate? No, North and South Korea have exactly the same climate. Maybe it's because of differences in culture. No, up until 1945, North and South Korea were the same country. They had the same culture, the same religion, the same language, the same history. So what explains the difference between these two countries? Since the end of the Korean War, South Korea has had a market-based economy based on the rule of law and, in recent decades, democracy, whereas North Korea has been a communist dictatorship, complete with secret police and political prisoners. The difference is that these two countries have very different incentives for their citizens. By the way, who am I? I'm Patrick Walsh. I'm an associate professor of economics at St. Michael's College near Burlington, Vermont.